Hey, my name is Dr. Dana Wasserman. Welcome to Facebook Live. And this is Tough Talk with Dr. Dana. And before we get started, there is a disclaimer below that you should probably read, but allow me to read just the rest of this for your edification. I'm legally required to tell you that I'm not providing psychological services and that this isn't intended to treat, diagnose, or cure any psychological issues you may have. I will be sure to honor your questions so that if necessary, you will know better when to seek help. Important stuff there. Okay. So again, in case you missed it, my name is Dr. Dana Wasserman. Welcome to Tough Talk with Dr. Dana. And today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the effects of COVID-19 on our psychology. Specifically, I want to talk about the impact of isolation. So what is isolation? It is the state of being separate or away from others. And we are all experiencing this now in the face of COVID-19. And we are all having very specific responses to this isolation, whether or not you are able to get out for a walk, or if you're more like me who has asthma and I just get out 3 minutes a day in the morning and 3 minutes a day at night. We're all going to have our very individual responses to isolation. However, and luckily for us, research has uncovered some commonalities that are important to discuss because most of these responses to isolation are completely normal. They're completely understandable. And there are also some responses that might require some assistance, and we're going to discuss those too. So just to as an aside, actually, on the news last night, it was reported that the Angus Reid Institute determined that 50% of Canadians' mental health during COVID-19 has worsened, and that 10% has worsened a lot. So that's a 60% drop in people's perceptions of their own mental health. And I, of course, cannot help to wonder if this kind of isolation that we're under is contributing to that. So what are you feeling? Let me give you some insight as to how I'm feeling being isolated during COVID-19. Now, to disclose, I have bipolar 2 disorder, so I have a pre-existing mental illness. And it's really interesting to see how my illness has responded to this isolation. I find that I am a little more up than usual, and then I tend to crash a little bit more easily, and I'm much more attuned to that. I find that I'm forgetting basic stuff, not just why did I walk into this room, something which I do on a regular basis, but more so than usual. I'm having sudden moments of global anxiety that it just washes over me. I don't know what it's from, and I feel like I must be forgetting something, but the reality is I'm forgetting nothing at all. It's even harder for me to sit still, something I do poorly in the first place, that I must always be doing something, that I must always be upright and engaging in some activity, because I can't help but wonder what would happen if I were to sit down and actually stop and think. I'm wondering if I might feel scared and vulnerable because of COVID-19 and everything that goes along with it. So I found this really fascinating paper out of University of Victoria in which Olav Krigelson, the researcher, talked about how social interaction seems to recharge the brain, that we need social interaction, even though that might seem obvious to us. What's less obvious is that he found that people without this interaction feel slower, they might have trouble focusing, they might make more mistakes, there's a loss of mental sharpness, and that he said people are hardwired to be social. It's deep within our brains that we need to connect to other people, probably to survive. Also, because we are hardwired to be social, when we don't get enough social stimuli, it has been found that it triggers our fight, flight, and freeze response. And that is what happens when we experience anxiety or panic. So here's an example. If I'm experiencing fight, I might be irritable and combative. If I'm experiencing flight, it might be Oh, binge watching Netflix for 2 days straight, or binge watching reality TV, or binge watching 90 Day Fiance. Not that I do any of that stuff. Maybe I do. Um, and if we freeze, then we just suddenly sit and we can't do anything. And we literally feel like we can't get anything done or anything accomplished. So, of course, one of the recommendations is to engage in some social interaction. And what we can do is we do so online. We have Zoom, we have Skype, and they're all wonderful. But what he outlines, and what I've found not only in talking with friends, but also doing therapy online, is that the emotional online responses are inherently different, which I find fascinating. I don't know about you, and maybe you could say so in the comments. I find online talk really tiring after a while, and much shorter than I would be than if I were sitting with a person. And I think my theory is that our minds are trying to process the information of a person in 2 dimensions as if they were in 3 dimensions. And that's a lot for our brains to process, and therefore we get tired. We miss that dimensionality of that person sitting in front of us. Still, regardless, online chats are the best way to go for adults and children alike. So we may be physically isolated, but we might not be so much socially isolated. Now, I want to talk about depression and anxiety as it relates to isolation. I want you to keep reminding yourselves that it's natural to feel stressed. It's natural to feel some symptoms of depression and anxiety. People are inherently feeling anxious right now, like I talked about before, and that the depression or anxiety you might feel is completely natural response to the situation that we're in. It might be unpleasant, but it is natural. Now, of course, the question is, how do I know when to seek help? Well, usually the key phrase is, does it interfere with daily functioning? You can have a bunch of symptoms, but if you find that you can't go about your daily routine, or let's say you're working from home and you're unable to do your work, it might be a smart idea to reach out for help. So let me give you some examples here. For depression, some symptoms include feelings of sadness, changes in appetite and sleep, feeling fatigued or lethargic, feelings of hopelessness, worthlessness, maybe even some guilt, needless guilt thrown in there, and difficulty paying attention and concentrating. For anxiety, we have some pretty potent feelings too, which is, for example, these are just some, hard to control worry, restlessness, and irritability. But they don't just impact our emotions. They also impact our cognition, the way we think. So depression can actually change our ability to think in general. So for example, depression can affect our attention and memory. It can affect information processing and decision-making skills. It can lower your cognitive flexibility, that is, the ability to adapt goals and strategies to changing situations. And it can even affect our executive functioning, which is the ability to take all the steps you need to get something done. I think that's because we are forgetting the steps in between. And anxiety can also affect cognition. Anxiety can cause people to ruminate. That is, we can have these repetitive thoughts about a single instance or topic, and it doesn't stop, and it gets in the way of us getting other things done, and it doesn't allow for other thoughts to filter through. Isolation can also be a big trigger for pre-existing depression and anxiety. Think about it, and it's very logical. The stressors of COVID-19 then compound the pre-existing, some of the symptoms that I'm going to add to that. And that might be incredibly stressful and might make your depression or anxiety feel even worse. And again, if there's any kind of interference with how you're functioning, please reach out for help from your provider. Also, if you need help or resources, the Stigma-Free Toolkit has a fantastic section on help and resources that you might need in order to get the help that you need. So, but all is not lost. Okay, this is not all doom and gloom here. There are things you can do. There is relief from the above symptoms. Okay, so there's this clinical neuropsychologist I really like named Vinay Baradia, and he said that individual resiliency, which is the big predictor of how someone handles the challenge of isolation and returns to normal. And there are four components to building resilience, okay? They are emotional regulation, and we'll go over that, physical exercise, social connection, and imitating a resilient role model. So, what is emotional regulation? That simply means that you accept and you process feelings rather than being overwhelmed by them. And one means to do that is by what's called cognitive reappraisal, or better known as reframing, which means you reinterpret unpleasant events to reframe them more positively. Here's a great example. It comes from real life. So I'm getting really, really sick of being inside all the time. I'm really tired of missing out on all these gorgeous days that we have. And it started to get me down. So what were the thoughts I'm having? I'll never get out of here. This is going to last forever. This is making me miserable. And I was just sort of in a bit of a funk because of that. Now, if I use the tool of cognitive reappraisal and I reframe, I could go, hey, wait a minute. Yeah, it's not fun being stuck inside, but now I have the chance to declutter that pantry and clean out that closet, things I wasn't able to do in the past when I was out and about. Wow, I feel better about that, and I'm really happy to have that opportunity. That's cognitive reappraisal for you. Next is mindfulness. And mindfulness is really important. That is bringing attention to the present moment. And mindfulness meditation uses the breath as your anchor. You want to follow your breath. And by the way, this is a very skeletal framework about what mindfulness is. There are books and videos that you can learn about mindfulness from, but I just give you some real world things here. And every time, let's say you're meditating, that you notice your mind wandering, instead of trying to force the thoughts out or force the thoughts back in, you simply acknowledge the thoughts and then redirect yourself towards the breath, because the breath is your anchor. Next is physical exercise. Of course, physical exercise is important to get your endorphins running, to get your blood pumping. And if you need some physical exercise, please check out the inimitable Lindsay G from the Stigma-Free Society on Mondays at 10 to help you get those endorphins going and feeling a whole lot better. Social connection, what I explained before, please find ways either through Zoom or Skype to connect to other people and keep that stimulation going as well. Lastly, imitating a resilient role model. This can be a family member or a friend or someone whom you see is really resilient in the face of COVID-19. You can ask that person, hey, how can I maintain a positive outlook? Or how can I keep up with physical fitness the way you do? And how can I best stick up for a schedule? How do I do these things? And a lot of these are really good ways to sort of reframe any kind of negative global emotions and cognitions into something a little more positive, that you do have a sense of control, that you can do something about this, regardless of the fact that we're all pretty much stuck inside. Let's see. Next, I want you to responsibly track your news, whether it's online, whether it's TV, whether it's radio. I want you to look at the impact all of this information is having on you. You got to set some limits, because too much news, quite frankly, is really anxiety provoking. And you got to just give yourself a break and have a news-free afternoon where you're not hearing, it's not always the most positive information you're going to get. Next is schedule relaxation and holding yourself to your old standards. Look, we're all under a chronic stress response right now. And it's important to schedule your activities and such. Set down a routine, do what you need to do. But if you happen to miss a task, if you happen to miss something here and there, don't beat yourself up for it. make sure you give yourself a break and just try to be flexible in how you go about your schedule during the day. And perhaps most importantly, constantly, constantly check in with yourself. Use introspection to think about your feelings. Have your feelings changed in the past few weeks? What has changed? For example, have you kept up with chatting with your friends online? If you haven't, then why not? So, for example, let's say there's a person who's been chatting with her or his friends online, and he notices or she notices that somebody on Zoom gave him or her a funny look, and he suddenly or she suddenly quits and won't go on anymore. It's because the thought error here is, oh, well, they look at me funny. Well, I guess they don't want me around. This is a cognitive error or thinking error called jumping to conclusions. That just because that this person gave you one wrong look does not mean they don't want to be around. And typically, if you check in, they will either not remember the situation at all, or they'll say, I was having a pretty bad day myself. And that honestly had nothing to do with you. But it's easy, I think, during isolation to fall into these thinking errors because our minds are not stimulated as we once were when we were outside and going about doing things. It's almost as though our minds are coming up with their own stimulation and giving us our own cues, and they're not always accurate. Lastly, I want to talk about something that I think is incredibly cool, which is dreams during COVID-19, dreams in isolation. If you go to hashtag quarantine dreams, and that's exactly what it sounds like, people have been reporting vivid and bizarre dreams since COVID-19 that are more detailed and easier to recollect, and they seem to last longer. I'm definitely one of those people. I kind of dread going to sleep at night because I feel like when I wake up, I'm going to be absolutely exhausted. Um, a lot of the themes of these dreams researchers have noted include bugs and natural disasters and difficulties breathing, you know, um, topics that are in our dreams that are very specific to COVID-19. Typically, the cause of these weird dreams, lockdown stress, job and relationship issues, general worries, sudden loss of familiar comforts. So we're stressed out right now, and a lot of that is going to become manifest in our dreams. From a neurological perspective, this is my theory, that our brains are working in overdrive to process all of this new and sometimes scary information that's just bombarding us. And I think this process can then manifest in our dreams. So sometimes it's nice, I think of it as, you know what, I don't want to hear anything more about COVID-19. Let my dreams do the work. So that's my short presentation on isolation in COVID-19. And now I'd like to see if anybody has any questions for me. Let me check. Here we go. All right, so let's see. How can we use this time of isolation to work towards self-growth regarding our mental health? Any tips or strategies? I would say write. I would say keep a gratitude journal and write down the things that you can be thankful for, even in the face of this, because sometimes I have found that it's very easy and it does not take a lot to tip towards the negative. I would also say practice, if you haven't already, I'm sure many of you already have, practice journaling and getting your thoughts down and trying to look for thinking errors. In fact, we are going to have in the toolkit an exercise looking at cognitive errors or thinking errors, and that if we are able to catch them and turn them around and reframe them, we'll be able to become more positive. Um, I'm a big fan of introspection and just talking with my friends, and also for me, talking with my therapist and just trying to get a handle on the greater picture here. What can I learn from this? How can this be good for me? It takes some time, and I think it takes another person to bounce these ideas off of, and it also reinforces social connection. So I hope that answers your question, but feel free to ask me more. Let's see. Let's see. Here we go. Let's talk about social distancing. How do you feel things will go once some measures will be eased? I am worried that people will be very negative and hesitant to be close to others now. Thoughts? Interesting. It didn't occur to me that people could be more negative and hesitant to be close to others. I do think there will be just a basic adjustment. Again, because our minds are so used to trying to make sense of these two-dimensional figures being the three-dimensional, fully human beings that we're used to congregating with. I don't know how negative it will be. It will just be, I think, awkward. I know I can see now I might just feel awkward. But that being said, there may be those who are less trusting because of that, because they have become used to this kind of distance. And it would be worth, I think, a dialogue with them, a loving dialogue with them about, hey, I noticed that you're seemingly a little more distant than usual. Is there anything you'd like to talk about? This isn't like you. And I'm wondering, kind of opening it up, what might come forth? I think it's definitely worth a shot. Here we go. All right. Ooh, another one. How do you think educators can help ease the anxiety of their students in gradually having them back to school? Talk about it, talk about it, talk about it. And have them imagine what they think it might be like to go back to school. Have them imagine what it's going to be like to be with their friends. What are their fears in terms of reacquainting with their friends? Is there a child who has a bully? Oh my gosh, being on break has been great because I haven't had to see my bully. What's going to happen when I have to see him again? I definitely think it's opening up a dialogue and allowing them to voice their concerns and voice their fears in front of a loving, trusting person, which I know all of you are. And I think that would be a really good segue into getting them back into the swing of things as school opens. I know I'm going to do that with my kids. All right. Let me see. Well, anyhow, let's see. Anything else? Not necessarily seeing anything else here. But what I would like to say is um, just the importance of listening and being an empathic listener, and not just for our kids, but also to our friends too who are suffering. Kids too are definitely feeling the heat of this pandemic, and they're feeling the heat of being isolated. Just a few little blurb I wanted to run by you on this. Um, you know, the isolation effects on kids, it's like one big anxious experiment. And, the kids in particular are missing out on play with peers, and it's one thing to play with your sibling. It's certainly one thing to play with your parents, but it's different than having your peers because they become your social and moral guides. So again, I would suggest that you allow them to talk to their friends through Zoom or Skype or phone as much as possible to kind of keep them connected. And, we don't know what difference a few weeks or months of isolation will make. And we have to remember how isolation with kids at home and how it affects the parents and parents' patience. I know that there have been times I've been more impatient than usual with my kids just because they're standing there, not because they've done anything inherently wrong, but just because I'm just a little more irritable. So I have to watch how the impact of isolation is affecting me and how it affects my parenting. So let's see here. Ooh, what do you suggest for the bad dreams? How to cope? Boy, I've been dealing with this a lot lately. people how to deal with bad dreams. A couple suggestions I have is having a routine, having a really good sleep routine that eases you into bed. So you're not just doing all kinds of work or all kinds of parenting and then you just flop right into bed because you're going right from one stress and it's going to manifest as other stress in your sleep. So I would say just to ease yourself into sleep, whether it's can you take a bath? Can you wrap yourself in a blanket and sip some decaf tea or read a book or whatever it is that you need to just calm down and mellow out and then get to sleep? I'm not saying that's going to take away the bad dreams, but I definitely think that helps. Another thing is if you wake up in the middle of the night with bad dreams, don't go running to electronics. Don't go running to your phone. That doesn't help. In fact, if anything, that further stimulates your brain and the parts of your brain that need to sleep. Again, I would go back to wrapping yourself up in a blanket, getting in a comfy chair, maybe just reading maybe not the most exciting book in the world, and to ease yourself back to sleep. But this is something I'd like to research more because I have heard this again and again about nightmares during COVID-19. And it's fascinating, completely fascinating. And music is healing too. Yes, thank you for that. Soft, loving music is healing, can help you on the way to sleep, and can help you on the way out of a bad dream, and it can help you back into sleep. In fact, one thing I've been doing is I've been falling asleep with YouTube 8 to 10 hour meditative music. Drives my husband crazy, but it's a way that I can stay asleep, or if I wake up, I'm waking up to the most soothing music possible. So thank you for that. So let's see, anything else before we wrap it up today? Hmm, Well, I think we're good. I want to thank everyone who has participated here today. It's been incredibly enjoyable, and I'm honored to be part of the Stigma-Free Society. Please check out our toolkit at stigmafreetoolkit.com for all kinds of resources for parents and children. And I'll be taking some ideas for uh, topics for next week. They're kind of swirling about my mind, and we'll see what's apropos to the times, as it were, because they do seem to be changing quite frequently. Anyhow, this is Dr. Dana Wasserman with Tough Talk with Dr. Dana. Thank you so much for listening. Bye bye.